Welcome back to We on Wild is One. We are glad you're watching. Thank you for joining us at this hour. I'm Eric Njoka. The headlines. The US, Egypt, Qatar, Turkey signed Gaza declaration at a peace summit in Egypt. President Trump says Gaza document will spell out rules and regulations.
I just want to tell you the people.
Israel releases 1,968 Palestinian detainees as part of a Gaza ceasefire deal. Israel accuses Hamas of violating deal after group said it's handing over only 4 bodies.
Hey, I have an idea. Mr. President, why don't you give him a pardon?
In a speech to the Knesset, President Trump calls on President Isaac Herzog to pardon Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is facing multiple court cases in which he stands accused of corruption. Madagascan President Andry Rajoelina flees the country after an elite military unit stand against the government in an apparent coup. This shortly before Rajoelina was due to appear on national television to make a speech to the people. Afghanistan, Taliban extends condolences over the loss of lives during the protests by Tehreek-e-Labbaik Party in Pakistan, expressing their solidarity. OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, announces it is teaming up with chip giant Broadcom to design and build its own specialized computer processors for artificial intelligence. The death toll from flooding in central and eastern Mexico rises sharply to at least 64, with another 65 reported missing.
En el caso de esta zona del país se alertó que iba a haber lluvias fuertes, pero fueron varios fenómenos que se presentaron que generaron esta lluvia intensa que no se esperaba que fuera de esta magnitud. Es decir, no había ninguna condición científica, meteorológica que pudiera indicarnos que la lluvia iba a ser de esta magnitud.
Que se firme, se renueve el convenio.
¿Es aproximadamente 61 personas que siguen desaparecidas?
64 personas lamentablemente fallecidas y son 65 personas que aún no están localizadas. Coordinadora Nacional de Protección Civil. Adelante, Laura.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta. Muy buen día para
We are now on day 13 of the government shutdown with no end in sight. The Senate is not set to reconvene until tomorrow after failing for a 7th time last week to pass a spending bill. In a controversial move by the Trump administration, federal employees began getting notices on Friday that they're being laid off in 60 days. And over the weekend, Vice President J.D. Vance warned that deeper cuts to the federal workforce could come if the shutdown continues, even as Democratic leaders have pushed for negotiations.
It's a totally fair question, and the answer is because this isn't a deal-making, this isn't a negotiation, this is hostage-taking. The Chuck Schumer has not said to us, this is what we need. He said that unless you give us what we need, we're going to shut down the government. We don't negotiate with a person who has taken the entire federal government hostage over a health care policy dispute.
Vance said the government is willing to negotiate over health care policy, but only after Congress passes a bill to reopen the government. Democrats argue that Republicans are the ones to blame, refusing to accept a short-term bill that would fund the government through October, restore Medicaid cuts, and extend Affordable Care Act subsidies. So far, neither side is budging.
It's the 13th day of the government shutdown in the United States. The deadlock between Democrats and Republicans continues. The Senate is due to vote on a Republican stopgap measure to fund the government for the 8th time on the 14th of October. But a breakthrough seems distant. U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson accused Democrats for the shutdown, while the House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries accused Republicans of overlooking the issue of health care costs. But as the political war of words plays out in Washington, the repercussions are greater for the federal workers, and with each passing day, a slow boil crisis is worsening. At least 4,000 civil service workers were laid off on October 10th. Flight operations are facing disruptions due to less hands on the deck. Donald Trump has threatened to lay off more federal workers if the shutdown continues. But as thousands of federal workers face the risk of losing their jobs, the lawmakers who call the shots still get paid. Under the Constitution of the United States, the pay of the lawmakers is protected. The president also will continue to receive his salary, no matter for how long the shutdown continues. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as SNAP, will continue to provide food items to women, children, and infants, but the cut in funds may eventually affect its overall operations. The situation is the same on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid front. The Social Security Administration has announced that it will send 12% of its staff on forced leave. To reopen the government, Republicans need support from Democrats. Republicans do not have the numbers in the Senate. In a 100-member chamber, Republicans need 60 votes to get the funding bill through. But they only have 53 seats, 7 less than what is needed. This is where they need Democrats to chip in. If the impasse continues and the stopgap bill fails to pass on the 8th vote, the government will remain shut, forcing thousands out of jobs or making them work without pay.
After 2 harrowing years in darkness and captivity, 20 courageous hostages are returning to the glorious embrace of their families, and it is glorious. 28 more precious loved ones are coming home at last to rest in this sacred soil for all of time. This is not only the end of a war, this is the end of an age of terror and death, and the beginning of the age of faith and hope and of God. This is the historic dawn of a new Middle East. The world is loving Israel again, and I said to people, the world is big and it's strong. And Ron, ultimately, the world wins. So now we're going to forge a future that is worthy of our heritage. We're going to build a legacy that all the people of this region can be proud of. Israel, America, and all of the nations of the Middle East will soon be safer, stronger, greater, and more prosperous. Thank you very much. Thank you.
But the momentous breakthrough that we're here to celebrate tonight is more than the end of the war in Gaza. It's with God's help, it'll be the new beginning for an entire beautiful Middle East. From this moment forward, we can build a region that's strong and stable and prosperous and united in rejecting the path of terror once and for all. We want to get rid of the terror and get on to other things. There are many other things in life that are so good. The final sprint to this deal began less than 3 weeks ago on the sidelines of the United Nations in New York. I met with many of the people in this room, and it all just started coming together. I've known so many of you for so long. You're friends of mine. You're great people. I have a couple I don't like in particular, but I won't tell you who. I have actually a few of them I don't like at all. But you'll never find out who they are. Well, maybe you will, come to think of it. But I have most of you who I like a lot, and I respect a lot. Maybe that's more important. We listened, and we exchanged ideas, and we kept pushing forward until the job was done, and the first steps to peace are always the hardest. And today we've taken them, and we've put them all together, and we've come up with this beautiful mix like nobody thought was possible.
Thank you very much, my dear President Trump, my dear brother, President Fath el-Sisi of Egypt, Majesties, Highnesses, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, and a very good evening. Well, I would say today is one of the greatest days in contemporary history because peace has been achieved after untiring efforts led by President Trump, who is genuinely a man of peace, who has relentlessly and untiringly worked throughout these months, day in and day out, to make this world a place to live with peace and prosperity. I would say that Pakistan had nominated President Donald Trump for Nobel Peace Prize for his outstanding, extraordinary contributions to first stop war between India and Pakistan and then achieve ceasefire along with his very wonderful team. And today, again, I would like to nominate this great president.
Switching gears for now, as West Asia breathes a sigh of relief because of the Gaza ceasefire, the Ukrainian president has hailed the truce and said that it brings hope that US President Donald Trump could similarly broker an end to the Russia-Ukraine war. He said on social media, I'm quoting here, "When peace is achieved for one part of the world, it brings more hope for peace in other regions." It's been a long-drawn war. Tens of thousands have been killed, millions forced from their homes, much of eastern and southern Ukraine decimated. Still, the war is showing no signs of abating. If anything, its spillover effect is being felt and being talked about. According to new reports now, Russia has reportedly started what analysts are calling Phase 0 in its military preparations for a potential war with NATO. You heard that right. The Institute for the Study of War, in fact, saying the appearance of a small group of Russian military personnel along the Estonian border is part of a broader effort to establish an information and psychological platform ahead of possible future conflict. This is crucial. And on Friday, October 10, Estonian authorities temporarily closed a section of the road near the Russian border after the border guards spotted Russian servicemen without identification markings. The road, which runs partially through the Russian territory, spans nearly a kilometer between the village of Varska and Satsi. Estonian officials noted that the uniforms of the individuals spotted suggested that they were not Russian border guards. Moscow, however, maintaining that its activities in the area were routine operations. The Estonian foreign minister, meanwhile, said that Russian troops have been acting more decisively and visibly than before, though he cautioned against exaggerated reports of escalating tensions there. The government has also announced plans to discontinue the use of this road with alternative routes already in place or under construction. The report saying that this incident follows earlier provocations, including the Russian military aircraft violating Estonian airspace on September 7 and 19. And according to Western experts, Russia has intensified both covert and overt actions against Europe, marking what they describe as Phase 0, basically a stage focused on shaping information and psychological conditions as a precursor to potential open war with NATO. The report notes this is the first time ISW has observed what the Kremlin calls little green men, that is, Russian forces in unmarked uniforms operating near a NATO state under this Phase 0 campaign. Meanwhile, the conflict in Ukraine continues unabated. Firefighters in southern Ukraine worked through the night to contain massive fires at textile and sewing warehouses in Odessa after a Russian drone attack, which damaged more than 5,000 square meters of storage space and destroyed a vehicle. One person was injured. On the front lines, Russia and Ukraine have been exchanging fire across multiple regions. The Russian Defense Ministry claiming to have shot down more than 70 Ukrainian drones over the past 24 hours, while striking Ukrainian fuel and energy infrastructure in 137 locations. Ukraine, meanwhile, says it has regained control of a village in Zaporizhia Oblast. This, as reports suggest, that the U.S. intelligence sharing has enabled Ukraine to conduct long-range strikes against Russian energy facilities, though neither Washington nor Kiev have officially commented on the report. Meanwhile, in Donetsk, the situation is dire. Ukrainian soldiers are increasingly exposed to drone attacks that can hit targets with precision. Local hospitals reported shrapnel injuries as the primary cause of the wounds, with evacuation of the injured becoming more difficult due to the intensity of the fighting. Soldiers and medical staff have also described a grueling reality. Some wounded remain on the front lines for days or even weeks, and the advanced technology of the drones is changing the dynamics of combat entirely. In Kramatorsk, authorities have ordered evacuations of families with children from certain neighborhoods as the city faces heavy shelling. And amid this escalated fighting, U.S. President Donald Trump has said over the weekend that he may provide Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk missiles if the Russian president does not end the war. And discussions between Trump and the Ukrainian president reportedly cover the potential delivery of such weaponry, though the Kremlin has reiterated that any use would require U.S. participation, and that would mean direct conflict between the U.S. and Russia. Today, Ukraine's foreign minister said more countries are expected to join a NATO-backed arms funding scheme known as the Prioritized Ukraine Requirements List. Already, countries including the Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Germany, Canada have financed earlier packages. In fact, it is designed to provide Ukraine with new weapons and reallocate U.S. stockpiles through contributions from NATO allies. As a whole, the situation in Eastern Europe remains tense, to say the least, with Russia advancing the phase zero tactics that we just told you about, Ukraine continuing to defend its territory under challenging conditions, and the NATO-backed support growing amid the escalating hostilities. How far will this escalation go remains to be seen. And after more than 3 years of the fighting, can diplomatic or military solutions still happen?
All right, shalom, shalom, giving all praises, honor, glory to our power, Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shah, Bahasham, Rachak, Raj, the honors to the apostles, the bishops, and the elders of Great Millstone. Peace and blessings to the hopeful elect of the tabernacles of David, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth, wherever you may be, wherever you may be, to you I say, shalom, Mashallah, shalom. All right, going to hit you with a real quick commentary here, based off one of the clips, speaking about Russia, which also real quick, speaking about Babylon, State of Israel, and I guess the Palestinians' so-called peace treaty or peace deal or whatever. That's not going to last because, referring to the prophecies of the book, there's going to be a World War III, and the State of Israel are going to be the main ones who are going to draw America into it, by way of the prophecies, where it says that the least of the flock shall draw them out. I don't think I grabbed that one, but I saw another clip speaking where it said something about the Israeli peace deal is the ultimate goal to also make peace with Iran. Okay, so I might have to go back and grab that clip if I don't have it. But yeah, now speaking about Iran and peace deal, and then going into this clip here or this topic here with Russia, where it's speaking about the talk of peace in the Middle East. All right, it's like it's spreading or whatever. Well, that's a false peace, false insecurity of peace. All right, that's a false peace because there is going to be World War III. In fact, I mean, nothing's done. If anything, it's on pause. But as a matter of fact, no, because the brother, watched that this morning. He was showing the devil, man. When he was showing the clip where they postponed the peace deal so they could fire on Gaza civilians. I can't remember exactly what it was. That was this morning about, I think like going to get aid or something like that. But it shows to show you that even with peace talks, there is no peace. Okay.
And U.S. President Donald Trump is in Egypt for the Gaza Peace Summit. After that visit to Israel, several world leaders, including the UK Prime Minister, the French President, are already in Sharm el-Sheikh. In fact, before Trump's Air Force One landed at the Sharm el-Sheikh International Airport, it was escorted by Egyptian F-16s. U.S. President Donald Trump has hailed his Egyptian counterpart as they began that summit on Gaza, saying he played a key role in the negotiations with Hamas. More than 20 leaders gathered to mark the Gaza ceasefire and the return of the Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian detainees. In fact, the Palestinian president is also attending the summit there in Egypt. These are the live images, in fact, that we're getting to you of those world leaders there. Trump's plan for ending the war in Gaza has left open the possibility of a role for Abbas's Palestinian Authority, which is a rival to Hamas. And remember, Abbas also represents Palestinians at international organizations. And among the other notable attendees there, the Turkish president, Saudi Arabia's foreign minister, among others.
United States President Donald Trump on Monday called for a new era of harmony in the Middle East during a global summit on Gaza's future in Egypt. World leaders representing nearly 36 countries joined the summit to try to advance broader peace in the region. The meeting took place as Israel and Hamas traded hostages and prisoners as part of a US-brokered ceasefire agreement. Alongside Egyptian, Turkish and Qatari leaders, Trump signed a document he said would lay the groundwork for Gaza's future.
This is a monumental day. This is a monumental moment in the history of the world beyond the Middle East. We've all agreed that supporting Gaza must be done to lift up the people themselves, but we don't want to fund anything having to do with bloodshed, hatred, or terror, as has happened in the past. And for the same reason, we're also agreed that Gaza's reconstruction requires that it be demilitarized and that a new, honest civilian police force must be allowed to create a safe condition for the people in Gaza. As I said earlier, I intend to be a partner in securing a better future. We're going to be working, you're going to be working with the United States, and we're going to make sure that the Middle East is going to be a safe and secure place. It's a very important place in the world.
Trump's Middle East tour also included an address to the Israeli parliament in Jerusalem, in which he declared Israel's war on Gaza to be over and called for peace.
So now, all of a sudden, you see this sudden shift about peace, this peace, that peace here, peace there, peace between them and Israel. Is going to be peace between Israel and Iran. All right. Oh, this talk of peace. Maybe peace can be with Russia. So there's this sudden shift about peace talks. Okay. And it's the upset and off-throw prophecy. But nonetheless, I want to get into this thing here, which I've looked at a few times. But I'm actually going to read about it today, because we talked about recently the situation where you have Russia versus Ukraine, obviously, but then you had the drones, the Russian drones that were shot down over Poland airspace, which that should have prompted NATO to enter in, which would have forwarded World War III. But as you see, which I believe the apostle talked about it, he said they were scared, which is true though, because according to Article 5, if you attack one of us, you've attacked all of us. Okay. Now the drones may not have been, if I'm correct, they weren't an actual attack, but they were still, in their airspace, and they had to shoot them down. So whatever the case may be, NATO was supposed to stand up, and whatever, right? Whatever should be taking place right now, but it's not, because everything is according to the prophecies. But as everything we just talked about, it all leads to World War III, which will happen. Okay, so this is the from the Russia business and all that stuff. It's called Phase Zero. So the Russian Phase Zero refers to Russia's accelerating informational and psychological condition setting campaign to prepare for a possible future war with NATO. All right. It says this phase involves a variety of overt and covert attacks, as well as I call them Fantastic Four, because sometimes you know how YouTube is. Sometimes you can say things to get away with it. Sometimes they get you for it. But, as well as Fantastic Four claims aimed at creating fear, fragmenting NATO's resolve, and pushing European states to decrease support for Ukraine and reduce defense efforts. So it says the strategy is characterized by several key elements: informational and psychological warfare. Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR, has been issuing frequent FF claims, such as alleging that UK is planning a pro-Ukrainian attack on a vessel to be blamed on China. Actually, I think we read this before. Okay, but it's okay. We'll read it again. Yeah, I believe we read this before. Yeah, so they are alleging that UK is planning a pro-Ukrainian attack on a vessel to be blamed on China. So they're gonna, or they're saying that they're going to make an attack and blame it on China, which we know that China and Russia are close allies because they're part of the same coalition, which is the BRIC nations. Okay. It says these claims aim to influence both international and domestic audiences, framing Western actors as responsible for aggression and justifying potential future Russian action against NATO. Hybrid attacks. Russia has increased overt and covert attacks against NATO states, including sabotage missions, electronic warfare, interference, GPS jamming, arson, and drone incursions into NATO airspace. Recent examples include drone sightings over European airports in Oslo and Munich, with German officials attributing some to Russia. Reddit says Little Green Men. A significant development in Phase Zero is the re-emergence of Little Green Men, armed troops in unmarked uniforms. All right, armed troops in unmarked uniforms, what they call Little Green Men, near NATO borders. An incident on October 10, 2025, saw Estonian border guards encountering 7 unidentified Russian servicemen near the Sastboot, I guess is how you pronounce it. This tactic, reminiscent of the 2014 Crimea annexation, aims to create plausible deniability and sow confusion. All right, so strategic objectives. The overarching goals of Phase Zero are to create a pervasive sense of threat across Europe, gain concessions in the war against Ukraine, and deter Western support for Ukraine. All right, because America backs up Ukraine with either with funding or with technology, and it's possible that they'll share intel from time to time, which Russia really doesn't like, because certain intel paired together with certain missile technology, they can the Ukrainians can really strike somewhere in Russia that can really hurt them. Like one recent talk was about their oil refineries, right? So if they're given certain missiles that can reach their oil refineries and given the intel to do so, that's really going to piss Russia off at America, okay? And so America is really trying to play its cards in the background, but ultimately it will get sucked in World War III. It's not really like it's not in it, but I mean, to a point of no return, all right? The overarching goal of Phase Zero are to create a pervasive sense of threat across Europe, gain concessions in the war against Ukraine, and deter Western support for Ukraine. Russia also seeks to prevent European states from bolstering their defenses by portraying such actions as provocative, okay? And ultimately, they're not going to stop trying to go after Ukraine. And that's why they're urging, America, to like rush our tread softly, okay? Because we're not going to play around. And then as we talked about the NATO situation, we don't know where that's going, but it's definitely not going where it should go. Okay, but while there is no current evidence in an imminent conflict or military buildup, Russia's longer-term plans, such as military district restructuring and base construction near Finland, suggest preparations for a potential future NATO-Russia war. All right, which is what all speaking of World War III. Okay, because everybody has allies. Because if NATO was to go today and gang up on Russia for the sake of Ukraine or Poland or whoever, well, that's what the BRICS are for. That's what China is for. That's what India is for, and so on and so forth. And just those three we named, Russia, China, India, they got mass armies, man. Okay, so that's World War III right there. Okay, but you know the Lord's going to play this thing out how He wants it to play out. As a matter of fact, let me ask you another question. Let's see, what comes after Russia's phase? Phase 0. If anything, that is. According to military strategists and analysts, what comes after Russia's phase 0 will likely be a phase 1, which would involve conventional military operations, potentially escalating from limited engagements to a broader conflict. All right, so that's basically boots on the ground versus one another. Phase 1. Did I skip something? Okay, this progression is based on established military doctrine and observed Russian behavior in previous conflicts. Here's a breakdown of the likely progression. Phase 1, conventional military operations. Following the phase 0 of informational and psychological condition setting, a phase 1 would typically involve the overt use of conventional military force, which I think it just mentioned that in phase 0. This phase could manifest in several ways depending on Russia's strategic objectives and the level of resistance encountered. Limited military engagements and border provocations. This could involve more direct military actions along NATO borders, such as increased incursions by ground forces, as we just mentioned, naval vessels or aircraft, potentially leading to skirmishes. Yep, see, battles. These actions would likely be designed to test NATO's response, probe defenses, and create localized instability. But they're claiming that now. They're claiming that those drones were to test, the response of NATO and so on and so forth. I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying that's what, some sources say. Targeted strikes and sabotage. Russia might escalate its hybrid attacks from phase 0 to more overt and destructive targeted strikes against critical infrastructure with NATO member states. This could include cyber attacks coupled with physical sabotage of energy grids, communication networks, or transportation hubs, which we just talked about the energy grids. All right, or somewhat kind of really we talked about the oil refineries, but I might be wrong about the oil thing. I think it might have been an energy grid, something mentioned about between Russia and Ukraine, a little energy war or something like that. That's something I have to go back and look at, okay? Because there's so much stuff happening, man. Is it possible to really tag everything? Little Green, we just saw that. Okay, Little Green Men expansion and occupation. So Little Green Men expansion and occupation. All right, the Little Green Men tactic observed in phase 0 could expand significantly. Instead of just probing, these unmarked forces could be used to seize and occupy strategic territories, particularly in areas with significant Russian-speaking populations or perceived historical ties to Russia. And that's what they were saying about the whole Ukraine. The Tucker Carlson interview, all right? He broke down the whole history of why Ukraine belongs to us, and we're going to take it back, all right? So particularly in areas with significant Russian-speaking populations, Ukraine, or perceived historical ties to Russia, which they're already taken some of Ukraine, if I'm correct. This would aim to create a fait accompli before a full NATO response could be mounted. We're going to grab that. We'll copy that. Full-scale invasion of a bordering NATO state. In the most extreme scenario, phase 1 could culminate in a full-scale conventional invasion of a NATO member state, particularly those bordering Russia or its allies. This would represent a direct challenge to Article 5. There you go, see? Article 5 of the NATO treaty and would trigger a collective defense response. But if NATO joins in a defense response against Russia, that's what he has his allies for. Okay, so it's not going to be, just a bunch of guys bullying one guy. All right, it's going to be both sides against both sides, and yes, Babylon will be a part of that. Okay, because even the scriptures tell you, well, one particular scripture says, because there's many scriptures, I'm just going to try to break those up. But one scripture in Revelation, which says about the Euphrates River drying up to make way for the kings of the east. Right. So, escalation dynamics. The transition from phase 0 to phase 1 will likely be characterized by a significant increase in the intensity and overtness of Russian actions. The goal of phase 0 is to soften the ground and create a narrative. Phase 1 would be about achieving concrete military objectives. Information warfare continues. Even during phase 1, information warfare will remain a critical component, aiming to sow discord, demoralize the enemy, and justify Russian actions to both domestic and international audiences. Cyber warfare intensification. Cyber attacks will likely intensify, targeting military command and control systems, critical infrastructure, and government networks to disrupt operations and create chaos. Conventional force deployment. I keep trying to say development. Conventional force deployment. Russia would deploy its conventional military assets, including ground forces, air power, and naval assets, to achieve its objectives. The scale of this deployment would depend on the specific targets and perceived level of resistance. Right, precedence and analysis. Analysts often draw parallels to Russia's actions in Ukraine, where a phase 0 of information warfare and covert operations preceded the annexation of Crimea. We just talked about that, right? And the conflict in Donbass, all right, which I'm not sure about the Donbass conflict. That would have to be something I look into. I probably won't remember. If I do, I will, though. The current phase 0 against NATO. Current phase 0 against NATO is seen as a preparatory stage for a potential future military action, even if that action is initially limited in scope. And that future military action is World War III. Okay, and it's not just going to be some nations. It's going to be everyone with the fighting standing military. The exact nature and timing of phase 1 are highly speculative and depend on numerous factors, including geopolitical developments, NATO's deterrence posture, and Russia's internal calculations. However, the current phase 0 activities are widely interpreted as laying the groundwork for potential future military confrontations. Right, fates accompli, French for accomplished fact. Right, obviously fate meaning fact, comply, accomplished, fate accompli, if that's how you pronounce it. French for accomplished fact refers to an action that has already occurred and cannot be reversed, making further discussion or resistance pointless or very difficult. And they're talking about what it means of war, or in this particular case, once the conflict happens, there's no scaling it back. It is a situation that has been decided or completed before those affected by it have had a chance to react or object. Like in the case of a strike on like I was mentioning, a strike directly on NATO, where NATO jumps in, and then there's no coming back from that. The term is often used in political, diplomatic, or military context to describe a situation where one party presents another with a completed action, thereby limiting the options of the other party to either accept the new reality or face significant consequences if they try to undo it. For example, if a country annexes its territory, that annexation becomes a fait accompli, and other nations must then decide how to respond to the new territory reality. That's what's happening right now with Russia and Ukraine. Though from the Russian side of things, they're saying that it belongs to us anyways, which Putin pretty much proved that. Okay, but what about the rest of the world? How is the rest of the world going to react to it? Okay, similar example, you have the state of Israel and Palestine. So you had these countries that recognize Palestine as a state, but you have the state of Israel like, hell no, all right, we're going to destroy these people and da-da-da-da-da, okay? So how is, that's pretty much the situation there. How is everyone else going to, take to this particular situation? Yeah, but that's spot on right there with Russia and Ukraine. For example, if a country annexes a territory, like Russia annexed Ukraine, or Crimea, actually, not Ukraine, but Crimea, which is, a portion, but you get my point. More on point, Crimea, the annexation becomes a fait accompli, something you can't turn back for. And what happened because of that? They blew up the Crimea bridge. That was done on purpose, man. Not saying the Russians did it, but whoever did it blew it up on purpose. Okay, and other nations must then decide how to respond to the new territoriality. Key characteristics of a fait accompli include irreversibility. The action is presented as something that cannot be undone. Lack of prior consultation. Those affected are not consulted or given a chance to object before the action is taken. Strategic advantage. Yeah, because some see like Russia just did, just did whatever, right? Just started off. No. Putin proved his reason for doing it. Okay, not that I'm advocating either side, I'm just making the point. And it says strategic advantage. The party creating the fait accompli gains a strategic advantage by forcing others to react to an existing situation rather than preventing it. There you go. And that's many places, okay? Who was it? North Korea? I think it was North Korea. North Korea versus South Korea. And you had America and Japan butting into that. China, I think China's talking about taking Taiwan. And then you got America. I believe that was around the time where Biden was in office, where he actually met with Xi Jinping. And he was like, yeah, okay, shaking hands and saying, okay. But then you're still butting in the business, all right? And China's like, hey, we're not going to stop doing what we're doing. So if you butt into this, then you're basically saying that you're going against us. That's what America's doing. America's everywhere in everybody's business, okay? So those are just a couple examples on that, from that end, okay? So things are very interesting on many, many levels, right? MOTB, civil unrest, right? Both locally and globally. World War III and anything else you could probably think of. A lot of things happening right now, according to prophecy, man. But I just want to tap into that. It actually got a little bit more than we wanted. So the water, I was trying to for that. There's probably just a couple more things in the news. So Lord, will you edify and close it out there, Shalom.